The Mobile area's biggest manufacturer is a firm that keeps growing from its complex of buildings on the Mobile River. I'm talking about Austal USA, the Mobile branch of an Australian company that has 4,200 workers building ships for the U.S. Navy. The biggest question is, how long will that government work last? I went to Austal looking for answers. The Mobile waterfront is busier than ever since Austal USA set up shop on the Mobile River. Founded in 1999, the American branch of the Australian company has invested millions of dollars to build a state-of-the-art facility to construct littoral combat ships and high-speed transport ships for the U.S. Navy. Austal USA's President Craig Perciavalle took me on a tour of the shipyard, which has an annual payroll in excess of $200 million. While it provides a good living for those who work there, not everyone in Washington is happy with the littoral combat ship program. In July of this year, the Government Accountability Office found it was more expensive to operate an LCS than a larger frigate with more crew members, that sailors assigned to serve on board an LCS needed a long time to train, and that the ships faced unrealistic maintenance plans. Still, Navy Secretary Ray Mabus had praise for the program.
I think that Austal and the Austal workforce is doing a terrific job of building the joint high-speed vessels and the littoral combat ships. And they're coming in, the Navy is very, very pleased with these ships.
Perciavalle told me much of what the GAO reported is old news.
You know, there are things that come up when you're dealing with a first-in-class shipbuilding program that ultimately get addressed, and we've certainly been addressing them as the program matures.
It's also been widely reported that Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel ordered the Navy to trim its order for new LCS from 52 to 32.
52 is a big number, but we can keep it at 32. That's a real positive step.
So the talk is, should we continue beyond the 32 or not?
Presently, though, the Navy shipbuilding plan, as we understand it, consists of 52 LCSs.
And that's true, according to congressional sources. They tell me the Navy has a requirement for 52 of what it calls small surface combatants. But the Secretary of Defense has called for trimming the LCS program and limiting the current buy to 32 vessels. Navy Secretary Mabus signaled there may be need for change in the program.
This is not unusual, and this is not anything out of the ordinary. We do it on every single ship type we have in the Navy. And what we do is we look at requirements, we look at lethality, we look at survivability, we look at what this ship is supposed to do, and does it meet the requirements.
Just like a good quarterback, Perciavalle gives credit to his front line, in this case, his employees.
The real strength of the company, the employees that we have. People work really, really hard. It's a demanding work, but there's a lot of pride in what we do.
Right now, Austal has enough projects in the pipeline to keep those workers busy for at least the next 5 years and possibly all the way to 2021.
We feel that the products that we're delivering to the Navy are selling themselves, and we're getting a lot of favorable feedback from the Navy on how they're operating.
But Austal has a background in commercial shipbuilding too, and could build vessels that could be used off our coast.
One of the things we are focusing on is maybe something, you know, supporting the Gulf of Mexico, operations in the Gulf of Mexico, oil and gas. There's nothing like launching a ship, watching it float, watching it get tested, watching it run. There's nothing more rewarding than that, and I think it's a great career to be in.
And as for the future, Secretary Hagel commissioned a task force to look into the future of the program, including alternative proposals from the Navy and possibly a completely new design, existing ship designs, and a modified LCS. So what's the latest on that? That study was completed in July. The House Armed Services Committee was supposed to get a classified briefing from the Navy about that in September, but it was canceled. I also tried to speak directly with the Secretary of Defense about the Navy's plans, but never received the courtesy of a reply. Of course, there will be a new presidential election in 2016, and that could bring a new direction for the LCS program and Austal USA. Now, if you want to see my complete interview with Craig Perciavalle, where he talks about relations with local communities and lawmakers and more, it's available now on our website, fox10tv.com. All right, thank you very much, Lenise. It's kind of an overcast day here. I heard what Chastity say about rain moving in. Hopefully that won't interrupt any of the reenactment festivities for this weekend. Now, think for a second. If you cut off supplies to an army, you cut off its ability to defend itself or even to attack. And that really was the bottom line behind what turned out to be the Battle of Mobile Bay. Now, here's a look back at the history of what turned out to be a real turning point in the Civil War. Watch. It took place during what turned out to be the waning days of the Civil War. The Confederacy had grown increasingly dependent on blockade runners, ships that were able to sneak past the Union fleet, bringing much-needed supplies to Confederate factories and forces. Since the port of New Orleans had fallen to then Union officer David Farragut in 1862, Mobile Bay offered the next best supply line for the blockade runners from Havana. Dr. Tom Ward, chair of the history department at Spring Hill College, told me the Union knew it needed to cut off the supply routes.
To really blockade Mobile, to really cut off the blockade runners, you had to control the port. And so once you got into the bay, you could shut the port off. And like I said, with New Orleans already shut down, with Pensacola shut down, Mobile was incredibly important for bringing goods in and out. In 1862, 1863 through 1864, and also you had the rail connections in Mobile.
To try to prevent Union ships from capturing Mobile Bay, Confederate forces introduced what they called torpedoes, which were really underwater mines.
The mouth of Mobile Bay was mined with basically a lot of them were almost like beer. Some of them actually were beer kegs, full of gunpowder and things like this. They had mined the channel to keep the Union ships out. A lot of those mines or those torpedoes didn't go off. There's still a lot of debate on why they didn't go off, but probably they'd been sitting in Mobile Bay too long.
After Union forces landed on Dauphin Island and attacked Fort Gaines, the Battle of Mobile Bay began on August 5th, 1864, when now Admiral David Farragut's fleet of 14 ships moved into the torpedo-filled Mobile Bay. As the fleet approached Fort Morgan, the Tecumseh hit a torpedo and sank. Despite the danger, Admiral Farragut commanded his fleet to continue sailing into Mobile Bay, ordering, "Damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead." The 13 other ships made it past Fort Morgan, eventually forcing the Confederate ships in the bay to either give up or flee. It took 3 weeks, but Farragut's ships and the Union Army forced Fort Morgan to surrender. While the city of Mobile would remain in Confederate hands until April 1865, no more blockade runners were able to deliver supplies to the Confederacy, which surrendered 8 months later. Now, really, Admiral Farragut had no choice but to keep going forward. If he had stopped after the Tecumseh had sunk, the rest of his fleet really would have been sitting ducks for batteries from here at Fort Gaines and over in Fort Morgan. So he really had no choice. He had to go ahead. It was a calculated risk, and it worked out for him and the Union. The GoDaddy Bowl is more than just a football game. It's also a chance for the players to reach out to the community, and especially to those who can't make it to the game Sunday night. That's why some of them took a field trip this morning. It's not unusual for the hallways at USA Children's and Women's Hospital to be filled with people in uniforms. But today the physicians and nurses were joined by big guys in a different kind of uniform, bringing a different kind of medicine.
We came with gifts. Here you go.
Azalea Trailmaids, as well as players from Toledo and Arkansas State, were all on the same team as they visited patients and their families, giving away footballs, stickers, teddy bears, and smiles. The visits from the big guys left some of the little guys speechless, but the thought is what counted.
Thank you. How you doing? Thank you very much for that. No problem.
Journey Kotauskas is 19 months old and spent 6 months at Children's and Women's right after she was born. And it's not the first time she's been visited by players.
They surprise all the kids. I've seen them here. They've come here before and visited with Journey when she was a baby. And, it's just nice that somebody actually cares, to come around and take time out of their day to, bring little toys for kids, and stuff to, kind of brighten up their stay. Okay. Maybe she's going to get big like her daddy and play ball.
When we walk in, they're a little bit shy at first, and then they start smiling and warming up to us once we start talking to them, and it's really cool.
Thank you. We appreciate it.
I think it's a really great thing that they do.
And that visit to Children's and Women's is an annual event for the players. Congressman Bradley Byrne told federal officials today that folks along the Gulf Coast have lost confidence in the federal government, especially when it comes to determining the red snapper catch in our area. The scene was a House subcommittee hearing in Washington, D.C., and that's where Congressman Byrne asked federal officials about the budget set aside to determine the red snapper population.
You have $900 million, and you can't give us any better count of the fish stock than what you've told us today.
So we do the best that we can in terms of accuracy.
My constituents do the best they can to pay their taxes that make up that $900 million.
Samuel Rausch explained that the feds estimate fish populations by trawling across the bottom of the Gulf, which he admitted isn't a good way to estimate fish caught around artificial reefs.
I've been fishing the Gulf of Mexico my whole life. I've never known anybody that's found a red snapper anywhere but a reef. That's where they grow. They are reef fish. So why do you not sample on reefs?
We believe we have an accurate sample of this fish stock.
Well, I think that the testimony and evidence before this committee directly contradicts what you just said.
Because of those federal estimates, this year's red snapper season was only 9 days long. Alabama has the smallest coastline in the Gulf, yet it accounts for 30% of the recreationally caught red snapper, thanks to the 17,000 reefs placed off the coast. Chris Blankenship, the Marine Resources Director of the Alabama Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, pointed out the drastic difference between the state and federal estimates.
The Alabama system estimated that 418,000 pounds of red snapper were landed during the 2014 season, while the federal system estimated that 1,041,000 pounds were landed.
And that overestimate meant a shorter snapper season. This afternoon, I asked Congressman Byrne a key question. Do you think they get it?
No, they obviously don't get it. I think that's the problem here.
What can be done about it?
Well, the only way we're going to change it is by legislation and just taking them totally out of the process.
And another problem, different states have different territorial limits. That's something that still needs to be worked out. May not need to be reminded, but visitors might. Drivers crossing into Alabama will soon see highway signs reading "Sweet Home Alabama," and the state will be paying for the privilege. The Alabama Department of Transportation is paying $75,000 for the rights to use Leonard Skinner's trademark phrase, which is held by Universal Records. The state will also pay $61,000 to put up the signs that read, "Welcome to Sweet Home Alabama." But wait, you may say, why is the state spending $136,000 on signs when other state agencies, for example, the Department of Forensic Sciences, need money to clear a backlog of criminal cases? You might say it's a case of apples and oranges. The money for the Department of Transportation comes from one part of the Alabama budget, let's say this apple, while the money for the Department of Forensic Sciences comes from another part of the Alabama budget, say this orange. You can't use money from one department to fund another. It doesn't work that way in business or in government. The Department of Transportation spends its allotted money in the best way it sees fit, led by a director who's appointed by the governor. In this case, the money is used to encourage tourism, which brings $11 billion into the state. So if you want state money spent in a different way, it's up to you to contact the governor's office or your local representative. That's how democracy works.